The champagne flutes caught the light like tiny prisms, scattering gold across the white tablecloths. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the emerald room, Puget Sound stretched dark and infinite, the water so still it looked like someone had poured ink across glass. My father's retirement party was everything my mother had orchestrated, perfect down to the last folded napkin, the last rehearsed toast. I stood near the dessert table, holding a glass of sparkling water I hadn't touched, watching my family perform for an audience of colleagues and country club acquaintances who barely knew our names. That's when I heard it, my mother's voice cutting through the gentle murmur of polite conversation like a blade through silk. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She stood 3 feet away, her back to me, speaking to my brother Christopher with the kind of casual cruelty she'd perfected over decades. Her tone was light, almost amused, the way someone might comment on weather or traffic. At least your father accomplished something worth celebrating. Jennifer's been doing that tech thing for years and still has nothing to show for it. No real position, no recognition. Some people just plateau, I suppose. Christopher's laugh was brief and uncomfortable, but he didn't correct her. He never did. My hand tightened around the glass until I felt it might shatter. The room kept spinning, conversations flowing like nothing had punctured the air between us. But I stood there frozen in that specific kind of pain that comes from being dismissed by the person who's supposed to see you first. My name is Jennifer Morgan, though most people call me Jen, and I've spent the better part of 2 decades building a career in technology, while my family measured success by the size of your house and the prestige of your job title. I grew up in Seattle, in the kind of household where achievement was expected but never quite good enough unless it came with visible status symbols. My father worked in aerospace engineering, respected and well compensated, the kind of career my mother could mention at dinner parties without embarrassment. My brother followed a predictable path into finance, married the right kind of woman, bought the right kind of house on Mercer Island. I took a different route entirely. After studying computer science at the University of Washington, I spent years moving between tech startups, building systems and leading teams, doing work that mattered to me even if it didn't come with corner offices or impressive business cards my mother could show her friends. The Emerald Room had been her choice, of course. Everything about this evening bore her fingerprints, from the floral arrangements to the seating chart that placed me at the far end of the family table, next to my 16-year-old daughter Emma and away from the center of attention. The restaurant perched on the waterfront, all glass and polished wood. The kind of place designed to make you feel simultaneously privileged and slightly uncomfortable. Waiters moved between tables with practiced efficiency, their footsteps silent on thick carpet. A pianist played something classical and forgettable in the corner, notes that filled space without demanding attention. My father's colleagues from his firm mingled near the bar, men in dark suits sharing stories I'd heard a dozen times before. My mother floated between groups, playing hostess, her silver hair styled perfectly, her dress expensive and understated in that way that actually screamed cost. I'd arrived early before the crowd, carrying a gift I'd chosen carefully, a leather-bound journal engraved with my father's initials and a fountain pen he'd mentioned wanting years ago. Small gestures toward a relationship that had always felt more obligatory than warm. Emma had come with me, elegant in a simple black dress, her dark hair pulled back, looking so much older than I was ready for. She'd squeezed my hand as we walked in, sensing my tension the way she always did. "We don't have to stay long," she'd whispered. But we both knew we did. These performances were mandatory in families like ours. The evening had unfolded exactly as expected until that moment by the dessert table. Toasts had been made, stories shared about my father's 40-year career, his steady competence, his reliability. My brother had spoken about following in his footsteps, about learning the value of dedication and precision. My mother had dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin, playing the proud wife with practiced emotion. I'd watched it all from my assigned seat, clapping when appropriate, smiling when required, feeling like a stranger at someone else's celebration. When I'd stood to refill my water glass, I hadn't expected to become the subject of conversation. I certainly hadn't expected my mother's assessment of my life to be delivered so casually, so definitively, within earshot. The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy coat. No real position. No recognition. Some people just plateau. Each phrase was a small violence, precise and economical. What made it worse was the certainty in her voice, the complete absence of doubt. She wasn't being cruel intentionally. She genuinely believed what she was saying. In her world, my career was a disappointment. A series of lateral moves that never cohered into something she could understand or present proudly. The startups I'd helped build, the teams I'd led, the products I'd launched, none of it translated into her language of success. I didn't have a title she recognized. I didn't have wealth she could see. Therefore, I had accomplished nothing. I set my glass down carefully on the white tablecloth and walked toward the windows, needing space, needing air that didn't taste like champagne in judgment. Outside, the water reflected the city lights, turning the sound into a mirror of distant windows and glowing signs. A ferry moved slowly across the darkness, its lights warm and steady. Emma appeared beside me, slipping her hand into mine. "I heard what Grandma said," she murmured. "She's wrong, Mom. You know she's wrong." I squeezed her hand but didn't answer. Knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were entirely different experiences. My phone buzzed in my clutch and I ignored it. Whatever it was could wait. Right now I needed to get through the rest of this evening without falling apart. The party continued around us, oblivious. My mother held court near my father, accepting compliments on the event, on the beautiful venue, on her impeccable taste. Christopher and his wife Nicole stood with a group of their friends, young professionals who worked in similar fields and measured their worth in similar ways. I could see them glancing toward me occasionally, probably wondering why I was standing alone by the windows instead of circulating, networking, making the most of the gathering. That's what ambitious people did, wasn't it? They seized opportunities. They made connections. The fact that I was doing neither only confirmed what my mother had said. I was someone who had plateaued, someone whose ambition had peaked somewhere unremarkable. My father approached slowly, his steps careful, his expression uncertain. He'd always been more passive than my mother, less cutting in his judgments, but complicit in his silence. "Jennifer," he said quietly, "thank you for coming. It means a great deal." I turned to face him, searching his face for any sign he'd heard what my mother had said, any indication he might contradict it. But his eyes were tired, his smile automatic. This was his night, and he wanted it to go smoothly. Confrontation wasn't in his nature. "Of course, Dad," I replied. "Congratulations on your retirement. You've earned it." He nodded, satisfied with the appropriate response, and drifted back toward his guests. Emma tugged my hand. "Can we leave soon?" she asked. "This place feels suffocating." I glanced at my watch. We'd been here 2 hours. The cake had been cut, the toasts concluded. Staying longer would only mean more small talk, more opportunities for comments that landed like paper cuts. "Soon," I promised. I moved through the motions of goodbye, hugging my father, accepting my mother's cool kiss on my cheek, waving to Christopher across the room. Nicole smiled at me with that particular brand of pity reserved for family members who haven't quite lived up to potential. I collected our coats from the check room, and Emma and I stepped out into the Seattle night. The air outside was cold and damp, carrying the smell of salt water and rain. The valet brought my car around, a modest sedan that ran well but impressed no one. Emma climbed into the passenger seat, immediately connecting her phone to the Bluetooth speaker. "You want to talk about it?" she asked as I pulled out of the parking lot. "Not really," I said. "But thank you for being there." She nodded and turned on music, something soft and instrumental that filled the silence without demanding conversation. We drove through the city, past the glowing windows of downtown high-rises, past Pike Place Market shuttered for the night, past the piers where boats rocked gently in their slips. My phone buzzed again in my purse, insistent this time. Emma glanced at me. "Might be important," she said. I waited until we hit a red light, then pulled it out. 3 missed calls. 2 from a number I didn't recognize with a Washington area code. 1 voicemail. My stomach tightened inexplicably. I played the voicemail on speaker. "Ms. Morgan, this is Catherine Reynolds calling from Microsoft's executive offices. We've been trying to reach you regarding the board position we discussed last month. We'd like to finalize the announcement this week if possible. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. This is time sensitive." The message ended. Emma stared at me, her mouth slightly open. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The light turned green, but I sat there frozen until the car behind us honked gently. I pulled into a parking lot, my hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. Emma turned down the music. "Mom," she said slowly, "did she just say board position? And Microsoft?" I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The last month had been a whirlwind of confidential conversations, background checks, reference calls, negotiations conducted under strict non-disclosure agreements. The opportunity had come through Richard Sterling, a former mentor who'd moved into a senior leadership role at Microsoft years ago. He'd reached out personally, asking if I'd consider joining their board of directors, bringing my expertise in artificial intelligence ethics and product development to their governance structure. It was the kind of position people spent entire careers working toward. It was recognition at the highest level of the tech industry, and I hadn't told anyone in my family because I'd learned long ago that sharing unfinished victories with them only invited skepticism and diminishment. I couldn't say anything until it was official, I explained to Emma. These things fall through sometimes. I didn't want to announce something that might not happen. Emma laughed, a sound of pure delight. "Grandma literally just said you'd accomplished nothing. And you're about to be on Microsoft's board. This is the best timing ever." I started laughing too, the absurdity of it hitting me all at once. The irony was almost too perfect. My mother's dismissal at the retirement party, delivered with such confidence, such finality, and just hours later, confirmation of an achievement she couldn't possibly diminish or explain away. I called Catherine Reynolds back immediately, apologizing for missing her earlier calls. She was gracious and professional, explaining they wanted to make the public announcement within the week, coordinate press releases, schedule the formal introduction. "This is a significant appointment, Ms. Morgan," she said. "We're very excited to have you joining us." I confirmed my availability for the various meetings and events, my mind racing through logistics and implications. When I hung up, Emma was grinning at me. "So when are you going to tell Grandma?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to call her right now. Part of me wants to let her find out with everyone else." Emma considered this. "Let her find out publicly," she said. "It'll mean more coming from Microsoft than from you. She can't argue with that." We drove home to our apartment in Bellevue, a comfortable 2-bedroom place with views of the city and mountains beyond. It wasn't Mercer Island. It wasn't impressive by my family's standards, but it was ours, paid for with work I was proud of, decorated with things we actually loved rather than things meant to impress visitors. I made tea while Emma ordered Thai food delivery, and we sat on the couch talking through what the board position would mean, how my schedule might change, whether I'd need to travel more. "Are you scared?" Emma asked at one point. "Terrified," I admitted, "but also thrilled. This is everything I've worked toward." She hugged me tight. "Grandma's going to lose her mind," she said into my shoulder. "I know," I replied. "I know." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, playing the retirement party over in my mind. My mother's voice so certain. Some people just plateau. The champagne flutes catching light. My father's tired smile. Christopher's uncomfortable laugh. The weight of being unseen, unrecognized, measured by standards I'd never agreed to but couldn't escape. And then Catherine Reynolds' voice on my phone. Time-sensitive. Board position. Microsoft. The dissonance between those two realities felt enormous, a gap I'd been living in for years without fully realizing it. I'd been building something significant while my family saw only absence, only lack. Tomorrow that gap would start to close. Tomorrow the narrative would shift. But tonight, in the dark, I let myself feel the full weight of both truths. The pain of my mother's dismissal and the triumph of my actual accomplishments, held together in the same moment, sharp and sweet and complicated as family always was. The morning came pale and gray. Seattle rain tapping against the windows in that persistent way that makes you forget the sun exists. I woke before my alarm, my mind already running through the logistics Catherine Reynolds had outlined the night before. Conference calls scheduled for Monday. Legal documents to review. A formal photo shoot for the press release. The machinery of corporate announcement grinding into motion, and me at the center of it still processing what it meant. Emma was already in the kitchen when I emerged, making scrambled eggs and toast with the efficiency of someone who'd been taking care of herself through my long work hours for years. She looked up when I entered, her expression somewhere between excitement and concern. "You didn't sleep much," she observed, sliding a plate across the counter toward me. "Could hear you moving around at 3 in the morning." I poured coffee from the pot she'd made, strong and dark, the kind that could strip paint. "Just thinking," I said. "This changes things, Emma. Not just professionally. With the family." She sat across from me, her own plate untouched. "Are you worried about how they'll react?" I took a bite of eggs, buying time to formulate an answer. "I'm worried about a lot of things. Your grandmother has spent my entire adult life convinced I've wasted my potential. This doesn't fit her narrative. She'll find a way to diminish it, or she'll be angry I didn't tell her, or she'll make it about herself somehow." Emma nodded slowly, understanding in a way that made me sad. At 16, she'd already learned to navigate the complicated currents of family dynamics, to read subtext and manage expectations. "You don't owe her anything, Mom," she said quietly. "You earned this on your own." I reached across and squeezed her hand. "I know. But knowing something and feeling it are different animals." We ate in comfortable silence, the rain intensifying outside, turning the world beyond our windows into watercolor washes of gray and green. My phone buzzed with an email from Catherine Reynolds, confirming our call for 10 that morning. Attached were preliminary talking points for the announcement, a draft bio that made my career sound more impressive than I'd ever articulated myself, a timeline for rolling out the news across various channels. I read through it twice, feeling simultaneously proud and like an imposter. The Jennifer Morgan they described, with her extensive experience in AI ethics and product development, her track record of building high-performing teams, her innovative approaches to responsible technology, that woman sounded formidable. That woman sounded like someone my mother might respect. But would she? Or would she find the flaws, the places where my path had zigged instead of zagged, the startups that failed, the positions I'd left, the choices that didn't make sense according to her particular calculus of success? I'd spent so many years trying to prove something to her, trying to earn recognition that never came, that even now, with objective validation from one of the world's most powerful companies, I couldn't quite silence the voice that said it wouldn't be enough. Emma left for a study group around 9, kissing my cheek and reminding me to eat lunch. "Call me after the meeting," she instructed. "I want to hear everything." The apartment felt too quiet after she left, just me and the rain and the weight of what was coming. I showered and dressed carefully, business casual, even though the call would be video, even though no one would see me below the shoulders. Appearance as armor, presentation as power. Tools I'd learned to use in rooms full of men who assumed I was there to take notes. At 10 sharp, my laptop chimed with the incoming call. Catherine Reynolds appeared on screen, composed and professional, her office at Microsoft's Redmond campus visible behind her, all glass and natural light despite the rain. She smiled warmly. "Jennifer, thank you for making time this morning. I know we're moving quickly, but that's how excited we are about this partnership." Partnership. The word felt significant, implying collaboration rather than hierarchy. I settled into the conversation, discussing timeline and logistics, reviewing the language they'd used to announce my appointment, clarifying my areas of focus on the board. "We're particularly interested in your perspective on ethical AI development," Catherine explained. "You've been vocal about responsible innovation, about building technology that serves humanity, rather than exploiting it. That's the kind of leadership voice we need in our governance structure." She pulled up a document outlining the board's current composition, showing me where I'd fit, what committees I'd likely join. The other names on that list were industry legends, academics, former government officials, people whose accomplishments were undeniable, whose reputations preceded them, and soon my name among theirs. "The official announcement will go out Wednesday morning," Catherine continued. "We'll coordinate with major tech publications, issue a press release, update the corporate website. Our communications team will brief you on potential media requests. Are you comfortable with interviews?" I nodded, though comfortable wasn't quite accurate. Prepared, maybe. Willing. "I've done media before," I said, "though nothing at this scale." She smiled reassuringly. "You'll have support. We're not throwing you into the deep end alone." But I'll be honest, Jennifer, this will generate attention. Board appointments at this level always do, especially for someone with your background in AI ethics. It's timely, it's relevant, and you're going to be in demand. The call lasted another 30 minutes, covering legal formalities, compensation details that made my stomach flutter, scheduling for upcoming board meetings. When we finally disconnected, I sat staring at the blank screen, trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just become real. This wasn't potential anymore. This wasn't maybe. This was happening, concrete and irreversible, and about to become public knowledge. I called Richard Sterling next, my former mentor who'd made the introduction that led to this opportunity. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm with genuine affection. "There's my board member," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Overwhelmed," I admitted. "Excited," "terrified," all of it simultaneously. He laughed. "That's exactly the right response. If you weren't scared, I'd be worried. This is a big deal, Jen. You've earned every bit of it, but that doesn't make it less daunting." We talked for nearly an hour, Richard sharing his own experience joining corporate boards, the learning curve, the dynamics, the ways to make meaningful impact versus just filling a seat. He'd been one of the first people to recognize my potential years ago, when I was just another mid-level manager at a startup most people had never heard of. He'd pushed me to speak at conferences, to publish my thinking, to step into leadership roles I didn't think I was ready for. "Your mother's still giving you grief about your career?" he asked at one point, his tone careful. I'd confided in Richard over the years about my family dynamics, the way my mother's disapproval hung over everything I achieved. "She told people at my father's retirement party that I'd accomplished nothing," I said. "That I'd plateaued." This was literally hours before Catherine called about finalizing the board position. Richard was quiet for a moment. "Well," he finally said, "that's quite the timing. How are you planning to handle it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to let her find out when Microsoft announces it publicly. Let her see it the way everyone else does, so she can't diminish it privately first." Richard made a thoughtful sound. "That's certainly one approach, though it might create more conflict than it resolves. Have you considered telling her directly on your terms before the announcement?" The thought made my chest tighten. And give her the opportunity to make it about how I didn't tell her sooner? How I excluded the family from something important. "She'll find a way to be the victim, Richard. She always does." He sighed. "You know your family better than I do. But Jen, you've spent years trying to earn her approval. Maybe it's time to stop trying. Maybe it's time to just be successful on your own terms and let her deal with her own reactions." After we hung up, I sat with that thought. Stop trying. Sounded so simple, so obvious. But undoing decades of conditioning, of seeking validation from someone constitutionally incapable of giving it, that was work of a different magnitude. I'd been proving myself to my mother since childhood, bringing home perfect report cards that earned nods instead of praise, winning awards that were met with questions about who else had won, choosing a career path that was dismissed because it didn't fit her narrow definition of success. Even now, with objective external validation from one of the world's premier companies, I was still calculating how to present it to her, still trying to find the angle that would finally make her see me. The rain had stopped by afternoon, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming. I drove to my parents' house on Mercer Island, telling myself I was just dropping off the jacket my father had left at the restaurant, not seeking confrontation, not starting anything. Their house sat on a tree-lined street, a substantial contemporary with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Washington. My mother had decorated it like a showroom, everything expensive and tasteful and utterly impersonal. I'd never felt comfortable there, even as a child. My mother answered the door in tennis whites, her hair pulled back, looking like she'd just returned from the club. "Jennifer," she said, surprise evident. "I wasn't expecting you." I held up the jacket. "Dad left this last night. Thought I'd drop it off." She took it, not inviting me in, her eyes scanning me with that assessing look I knew too well. "You left the party early," she observed. "Everything all right?" I could have said yes and left. Could have avoided the conversation entirely. But something in me, maybe the validation of Catherine Reynolds' call, maybe the years of accumulated hurt, pushed me forward. "Actually, Mom, I wanted to talk to you about something you said last night." About my career. Her expression shifted subtly, defensive walls going up. I don't recall saying anything inappropriate. Of course she didn't. The casual cruelties never registered as such in her mind. You told Christopher I'd accomplished nothing, I said evenly. That I had no real position, no recognition. That some people just plateau. She had the grace to look uncomfortable, though not apologetic. I was speaking to your brother, Jennifer. I didn't realize you were listening. As if that made it better. As if my presence or absence changed the content of her assessment. Whether I was listening or not doesn't change what you think, I said. You genuinely believe I've wasted my potential. That my career is a disappointment. My mother sighed, that particular exhalation that suggested I was being difficult, making something out of nothing. Your brother has a clear trajectory, she said. A position at a respected firm, a home, stability. You've moved between companies, Jennifer. You've never stayed anywhere long enough to build real security. As your mother, I worry. Worry. She dressed her disapproval in concern, made her judgment sound like care. It was a trick she perfected over decades. I have something to tell you, I said, the words coming out before I'd fully decided to say them. But I need you to just listen without interrupting. She crossed her arms, her posture stiffening, but nodded. I've been offered a position on Microsoft's board of directors. It's being announced publicly this Wednesday. It's one of the most significant appointments in tech governance, and it's based on my work in AI ethics and product development over the past 2 decades. I watched her face carefully, looking for the reaction I'd spent my life hoping to see. Pride. Recognition. Some acknowledgement that maybe she'd misjudged me. Instead, her expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that looked uncomfortably like irritation. Microsoft's board, she repeated slowly. And you're just telling me now? There it was. Not congratulations. Not pride. Just offense that she hadn't been informed sooner. I couldn't tell anyone until it was finalized, I explained. These appointments are confidential until they're announced. I'm telling you now, before the public announcement, because you're my mother. She shook her head slightly, processing. Well, that's certainly unexpected. Does your father know? Of course, that was her next question. Not how did this happen, not what does this mean for you, but whether I'd told my father first, whether hierarchy had been observed. I'm telling the family today, I said. But Mom, I need you to understand something. You said last night that I'd accomplished nothing. You've been saying versions of that my entire adult life. And I've spent years trying to prove you wrong, trying to achieve enough to finally earn your approval. But this board position, this isn't about you. This is recognition of work I've done, impact I've made, on my own terms. I'm not telling you so you'll finally be proud of me. I'm telling you because you're my mother and you should know. She was quiet for a long moment, her face unreadable. I've never not been proud of you, Jennifer, she finally said, the words sounding hollow even as she spoke them. I've only ever wanted you to reach your full potential. It was a deflection, a reframing that made her criticism sound like encouragement, that made my hurt sound like misunderstanding. I'd heard variations of this my entire life. I need to go, I said, suddenly exhausted. The announcement is Wednesday morning. You'll see it in the news. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. Jennifer, wait. It's good news. Really. I'm happy for you. The words were right, but the delivery was wrong, missing the warmth that would make them true. I nodded anyway, accepting what she could offer, knowing it was all I'd ever get. Driving home, I called Emma and told her about the conversation. How did she react? Emma asked. Exactly how I expected, I said. Made it about her, about not being told sooner. Couldn't quite bring herself to actually express pride. Emma was quiet, then said something that broke my heart a little. I'm proud of you, Mom, in case no one else says it clearly enough. I'm so proud of you. Tears blurred my vision and I had to pull over. Thank you, baby. That means everything. That evening I drafted messages to extended family, to close friends, preparing them for the announcement. I called my father separately, catching him in his study. He was warmer than my mother had been, genuinely pleased though somewhat confused about what the position actually entailed. That's wonderful, Jenny, he said, using the childhood nickname he rarely employed. Your mother mentioned you'd stopped by. She seemed a bit shaken. Shaken? That was one word for it. I should have achieved something she could understand sooner, I said, half joking, half not. My father sighed. Your mother measures success in very specific ways. It's not personal, Jennifer. It's just how she sees the world. But it was personal. It had always been personal. The specific ways she measured success were designed to exclude the path I'd chosen, to ensure I'd always fall short. Maybe she hadn't done it consciously, but that didn't make it less damaging. I spent the rest of the evening preparing for the week ahead, reviewing documents, researching the other board members, trying to feel worthy of the seat I'd been given. Emma ordered pizza and we ate it on the couch, watching a movie neither of us really paid attention to. Wednesday's going to be wild, she said during a commercial break. Are you ready? I thought about it honestly. Ready for the professional recognition? Yes. Ready for my family's complicated reactions? Not really. But ready or not, it was coming. The announcement was set, the machinery in motion. By this time next week, I'd be publicly recognized as a Microsoft board member, and my mother would have to reconcile that with her narrative of my plateau, my lack of accomplishment. Part of me took satisfaction in that. Part of me grieved what it meant, that even now, even with validation at the highest level, I was still measuring success by whether my mother finally saw me. Emma fell asleep against my shoulder halfway through the movie, her breathing even and peaceful. I looked at her, this girl I'd raised while building a career my family dismissed, and felt a fierce protective love. Whatever else happened, whatever my mother thought or said, I'd given Emma something different. I'd shown her that success had multiple definitions, that women could build careers on their own terms, that seeking approval from people who withheld it was a losing game. The rain started again, gentle against the windows, and I let Emma sleep, not wanting to disturb the peace of this moment before everything changed. Wednesday would bring press releases and phone calls, interviews and attention. My family would react however they reacted, and I'd deal with it. But tonight, in the quiet of our apartment, with my daughter sleeping trustfully against me, I let myself feel simply proud. Proud of the work I'd done, the choices I'd made, the woman I'd become despite my mother's narrow vision of what I should be. That pride didn't require anyone else's validation. It was mine, hard-won and unshakable, and no amount of familial disapproval could take it away. Tuesday arrived with unexpected sunshine, the kind of crisp autumn morning that made Seattle feel almost Mediterranean. I woke early, my mind already racing through the final preparations before tomorrow's announcement. Catherine Reynolds had scheduled another call for this afternoon to go over last-minute details, and I needed to finalize my response to the inevitable flood of LinkedIn messages and emails that would come once the news broke. Emma had already left for school, a note on the counter reminding me to breathe and drink water, her teenage wisdom making me smile despite my nerves. I made coffee and settled at my laptop, reviewing the press release one final time. The language was precise and complimentary, highlighting my background in artificial intelligence ethics, my experience leading product development teams, my published work on responsible innovation. Reading it felt surreal, like seeing my professional life translated into a language my mother might finally understand. My phone rang just after 8, Christopher's name flashing on the screen. I hesitated before answering, knowing this conversation would be complicated. My brother and I had never been close, separated by 4 years in age and an entire universe in how we approached life. He'd always been the golden child, following the prescribed path, checking the boxes that earned our mother's approval. "Jen," he said when I picked up, his tone careful. "Mom called me last night. Said you're joining Microsoft's board?" There was something in his voice I couldn't quite identify. Not quite congratulations, not quite accusation, somewhere in between. "That's right," I confirmed. "The announcement goes public tomorrow morning." Silence stretched between us, filled with decades of unspoken competition, comparison, the exhausting dynamics of siblings raised to measure their worth against each other. "That's a big deal," he finally said. "I had no idea you were even being considered for something like that." Of course he didn't. We didn't share our professional lives with each other, didn't celebrate wins or commiserate over losses. Our relationship existed primarily at family gatherings, surface level and performative. "It's been in process for a few months," I explained. Everything was confidential until now. Christopher cleared his throat. Mom was pretty upset that you didn't mention it sooner. She felt blindsided. And there it was, the family pattern playing out exactly as expected. My achievement process first as an offense against our mother. A violation of some unspoken protocol about information sharing and family loyalty. I told her as soon as I could, I said evenly. These appointments don't get announced casually over dinner, Chris. There are legal requirements, confidentiality agreements. I get that, he said, though his tone suggested he didn't entirely. But you have to understand how it looks from her perspective. Your career has always been, well, unconventional. She's worried about you. And then suddenly you're on Microsoft's board and she's finding out days before the rest of the world? I felt heat rising in my chest, the familiar anger that came from having my choices questioned, my path dismissed. She told people at Dad's retirement party that I'd accomplished nothing, I said, keeping my voice level. That I'd plateaued, that I had no real position or recognition. She said that hours before Microsoft called to finalize this appointment. So forgive me if I wasn't rushing to share professional victories with someone who spent years minimizing them. The line went quiet. When Christopher spoke again, his voice was softer. She said that. I could hear genuine surprise, maybe even discomfort. You were standing right there, Chris. You laughed. Another pause. I was being polite. I didn't actually think she meant it that seriously. I closed my eyes, trying to control my frustration. She meant it. She's always meant it. You just haven't been on the receiving end, so you don't see how it lands. My brother sighed, a sound carrying weight I couldn't interpret. Look, I'm calling to say congratulations. This is obviously huge and you should be proud. But Jen, be prepared for some complexity when this goes public. Nicole's already asking questions, wondering how this affects family dynamics, whether it changes things. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Changes what things exactly? I'm doing the same work I've always done, just with additional recognition. If that makes people uncomfortable, that's their problem to solve. You know how Mom is, Christopher said, an explanation that explained nothing. She has expectations about how things should look, how success should be announced and shared. You going around her, even for valid reasons, that's going to create friction. I stood up, needing to move, pacing to the windows overlooking the city. I didn't go around anyone. I followed standard corporate protocols for confidential appointments. If Mom's creating friction over that, it's because she's looking for reasons to be upset rather than just being happy for me. Maybe you're right, he conceded, surprising me. But you're still going to have to deal with the fallout. I'm just warning you it's coming. We ended the call shortly after, the conversation leaving me unsettled. This was the pattern, wasn't it? Any achievement that didn't fit the family narrative got processed as disruption, as something requiring management rather than celebration. My brother's call hadn't been about congratulating me. It had been about managing me, preparing me to accommodate our mother's inevitable reaction rather than expecting her to simply be proud. I tried to shake off the conversation, focusing instead on work emails and the afternoon call with Catherine. But Christopher's words kept circling back. Be prepared for complexity. As if my professional success was inherently complicated rather than straightforward. As if joining a corporate board required family approval and coordination rather than being my individual achievement. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Nicole, Christopher's wife. We rarely communicated directly. Our relationship mediated through family gatherings and group messages. Her text was brief and loaded. Heard your exciting news. We should get coffee this week and catch up. So much to discuss. The exclamation points felt aggressive, the suggestion of needing to discuss things vaguely threatening. What exactly did we need to discuss? How my board position affected her social standing. Whether it disrupted the careful family hierarchy she'd married into. I didn't respond immediately, instead making lunch and trying to center myself before the call with Catherine. This was the part they didn't tell you about professional success at this level. The achievement itself was straightforward, earned through years of work and demonstrated expertise. But navigating the social and familial implications, managing other people's reactions and insecurities, that was entirely different labor. The call with Catherine went smoothly, running through final logistics and confirming timeline. We're anticipating significant media interest, she explained. Your appointment hits several important themes: AI ethics, gender diversity and tech leadership, the intersection of innovation and responsibility. Be ready for interview requests from major outlets. She walked me through Microsoft's media relations support, the resources available to help manage the attention. You'll do great, she assured me. Just be yourself. That's who we selected, after all. After we disconnected, I sat staring at my laptop, trying to internalize what she'd said. Be yourself. But which self? The professional self that had earned this position through expertise and hard work? The daughter who still flinched at her mother's criticism? The woman who'd spent decades trying to prove her worth to people who measured it in currencies she'd never valued? All of these selves existed simultaneously, and tomorrow's announcement would throw them into sharp relief. I drove to Pike Place Market in the afternoon, needing to be around people and noise, needing to escape the echo chamber of my own thoughts. The market was crowded with tourists and locals, the air filled with the calls of fishmongers and street musicians, the smell of fresh flowers and coffee. I wandered through the stalls watching craftspeople demonstrate their work, couples negotiating over produce, children pressing their faces against bakery windows. Normal life, uncomplicated by corporate announcements and family dynamics. At a small cafe tucked into a corner of the market, I ordered tea and found a seat by the window. Outside, Elliott Bay stretched gray and choppy, ferries cutting white lines across the water. My phone buzzed continuously with messages. Former colleagues congratulating me after hearing through professional networks. Friends excited about the news. Each message was kind and genuine, and yet I felt strangely detached, watching my achievement generate reactions like a scientific experiment rather than personal triumph. An email arrived from my father, formal and carefully worded. Dear Jennifer, your mother and I wanted to express our congratulations on your appointment to Microsoft's board. This is clearly a significant professional recognition. We look forward to learning more about what this role entails. Please let us know if you'll be available for dinner this weekend. We'd like to celebrate properly. Love, Dad. The message was so perfectly diplomatic it could have been written by a corporate communications team. No real emotion, no personal warmth, just appropriate words arranged in appropriate order. I wondered what conversations had happened between my parents after I'd left yesterday. Had my mother processed her initial reaction, moved towards something resembling pride? Or had she doubled down on offense, on feeling excluded, turning my achievement into a story about how I'd hurt her? With my family, it was impossible to predict which direction things would tilt. A woman at the next table was video chatting with someone, her voice carrying despite her efforts to speak quietly. I know it's a great opportunity, she was saying, but my mom keeps asking why I didn't consult her before accepting. Like I need permission to make career decisions at 35. I felt an unexpected kinship with this stranger. This woman also navigating the impossible space between adult autonomy and familial expectations. Emma texted around 3. How are you holding up? Want me to bring dinner home? Her instinct for when I needed support never failed to amaze me. I texted back confirming dinner together, grateful for her steadying presence. At 16, she somehow possessed emotional intelligence that had taken me decades to develop, and even now remained imperfect. I returned home as afternoon faded into evening, the city lights beginning to glow against darkening sky. My apartment felt like a sanctuary, quiet and familiar, decorated with things that actually meant something rather than things chosen to impress. I'd built this life deliberately, separate from my family's expectations, and it had cost me their approval but earned me something more valuable: authenticity. Emma arrived with Thai food, her backpack heavy with textbooks, her face bright despite a long day at school. So, she said, unpacking containers of pad thai and green curry. Tomorrow's the big day. Are you ready? I considered the question honestly. Professionally, yes. Emotionally, I'm not sure. Your grandmother's going to make this complicated, and I'm trying to prepare for that without letting it diminish the accomplishment. Emma served us both, her movements efficient and caring. You know what I think, she said. I think you should just enjoy tomorrow. Let Grandma have whatever reaction she's going to have, but don't let it infect your experience. This is your moment, Mom. You've earned the right to just feel good about it without managing everyone else's feelings. The wisdom in her words struck me. When had she gotten so wise? When had I raised someone who saw through family dynamics with such clarity? You're right, I said. But old patterns are hard to break. I've spent my whole life trying to earn her approval. Even now, with objective external validation, I'm still calculating how to present it to her, still bracing for her reaction. Emma reached across and squeezed my hand. Maybe that's exactly why you need to stop. Maybe this is the moment where you decide her approval doesn't matter anymore. You have Microsoft's approval. You have your own approval. Isn't that enough? We ate dinner talking about her day, her classes, the college applications looming on her horizon. Normal mother-daughter conversation, grounding and real. After we cleaned up, Emma disappeared into her room to study and I returned to my laptop, reviewing materials one final time. The press release was scheduled to go live at 6 a.m. Pacific time. By the time most people woke up, my appointment would be public knowledge, searchable and shareable and permanent. I drafted a LinkedIn post to accompany the announcement, keeping it professional but personal. Honored and humbled to join Microsoft's board of directors, bringing my passion for ethical AI development and responsible innovation to this important governance role. Grateful to everyone who supported my journey to this point. Simple, authentic, the kind of statement that didn't oversell or undersell, that acknowledged the magnitude without false modesty. Around 9, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Jennifer Morgan? A woman's voice asked. This is Rachel Park from TechCrunch. I know the official announcement isn't until morning, but I wanted to reach out about doing a feature piece on your appointment. Your background in AI ethics is particularly timely given current debates about responsible innovation. My heart rate kicked up. The media attention Catherine had warned about was starting even before the official announcement. I appreciate your interest, I said carefully. Can we connect after the press release goes live? I want to make sure I'm coordinating properly with Microsoft's communications team. Rachel agreed readily, explaining they wanted to do a deeper profile piece. Not just cover the announcement but explore my career trajectory, my philosophy on technology ethics, my vision for governance in tech. After we hung up, I felt the reality settling more heavily. This wasn't just a professional appointment. This was becoming a public story, my career and choices subject to analysis and commentary. That visibility was both thrilling and terrifying. 4 years I'd worked somewhat anonymously, building products and leading teams without widespread recognition. Tomorrow that changed. Tomorrow I became someone people wrote about, someone whose decisions and statements carried weight beyond my immediate sphere. I called Richard Sterling, needing to hear a friendly voice. He picked up despite the late hour. Getting nervous? He asked, knowing me well enough to read my mood from the tone of my greeting. TechCrunch already called, I said. The news isn't even officially out yet and the media's circling. He laughed. Welcome to the big leagues, Jen. This is what visibility looks like. You'll get used to it. What if I say something wrong? I asked. What if I'm not ready for this level of scrutiny? Richard was quiet for a moment, then spoke with unusual seriousness. Listen to me carefully. You are absolutely ready. You were ready 5 years ago, but the opportunity didn't exist yet. You've done the work, built the expertise, demonstrated the judgment. The only question is whether you can believe in yourself as much as the people who selected you already do. His words settled something in me, quieting the anxious voice that questioned my worthiness. Thank you, I said simply. I needed to hear that. We talked for another few minutes about logistics and strategy, then said goodnight. I checked on Emma, finding her asleep with textbooks spread across her bed, and carefully moved them aside, covering her with a blanket. Back in my own room, I stood at the window looking out at the city lights scattered across the darkness like fallen stars. Somewhere out there, my mother was probably still processing yesterday's conversation, constructing her narrative about how I'd excluded her, how my success was somehow a betrayal of family loyalty. My brother and his wife were likely discussing implications and complications, measuring how my achievement affected their position in the family hierarchy. My father was probably trying to keep peace, uncomfortable with conflict as always. But tomorrow none of that would matter as much as it had before. Tomorrow I became a Microsoft board member publicly, with all the validation and visibility that entailed. My mother could maintain her narrative if she chose to, could find ways to diminish or discount what I'd achieved. But the external world would see something different. They'd see expertise recognized, leadership valued, a career built on meaningful work rather than checking prescribed boxes. I set my alarm early, planning to be awake and ready when the announcement went live. Sleep would be elusive tonight, my mind too active, anticipation too high. But that was fine. Some moments deserved to be met fully awake, fully present. Tomorrow would change things, shift the landscape I'd been navigating my entire professional life. And whatever came next, whatever complications or conflicts arose, I'd face them as someone who'd finally stopped waiting for permission to claim her achievements. The rain started again near midnight, gentle and steady, Seattle's lullaby. I listened to it against the windows, feeling oddly peaceful despite everything. Emma was right. This was my moment, earned through years of work my family had dismissed, but work that spoke for itself nonetheless. Tomorrow that work would be recognized at the highest level, and no amount of familial complication could diminish that fundamental truth. I built something real, something valuable, something mine. And tomorrow finally the world would see it clearly. Wednesday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of autumn dawn that makes everything sharp-edged and vivid. My alarm went off at 5:30, but I'd been awake for over an hour, watching the sky lighten incrementally from black to navy to pale gold. Today was the day. In 30 minutes the press release would go live, and my professional life would shift in ways I couldn't fully anticipate. I made coffee with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear but from the electricity of knowing everything was about to change. Emma emerged from her room still in pajamas, her hair wild from sleep. "Couldn't wait," she said, settling onto the couch with her laptop. "I want to watch it happen in real time." We sat together in the pre-dawn quiet, screens glowing, waiting. At exactly 6 a.m., my phone began buzzing with notifications. LinkedIn messages flooding in, emails arriving in rapid succession, text messages from colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years. The Microsoft press release had gone live simultaneously across multiple platforms, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Emma pulled up the official announcement on her laptop, reading it aloud. Microsoft announces the appointment of Jennifer Morgan to its board of directors, effective immediately. Ms. Morgan brings extensive expertise in artificial intelligence ethics and responsible innovation, having led product development teams at multiple technology companies, and published widely on the intersection of technology and social responsibility. She looked up at me, eyes shining. "Mom, they're calling you a thought leader in AI ethics. That's incredible." I felt something in my chest expand, a warmth that had nothing to do with coffee. Thought leader. The phrase felt almost absurd applied to me, someone who'd spent years quietly doing work that mattered without seeking recognition. Yet here it was, official acknowledgement that my expertise had value at the highest levels of the industry. My phone rang, Catherine Reynolds calling to congratulate me on the successful launch. "The response has been phenomenal," she said. "We've already had requests from major media outlets wanting interviews. The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, NPR, they all want to speak with you. How would you feel about doing a few select interviews today?" My stomach fluttered with nerves and excitement. "I'm ready," I said, hoping it was true. Emma made breakfast while I fielded calls and responded to messages, trying to stay on top of the avalanche of attention. Former colleagues sent congratulations mixed with surprise, many admitting they hadn't realized the scope of my work. Friends from graduate school reached out, remembering late-night conversations about technology ethics and marveling that those abstract discussions had evolved into board-level governance. Each message was a small validation, a reminder that the path I'd chosen, unconventional as it had been, had led somewhere significant. 7. My father called. His voice was warm in a way I rarely heard, almost proud. "Ginny, I've been reading the coverage. The articles about your appointment, they're quite impressive. I had no idea your work was so influential in your field." There was genuine surprise in his tone, maybe even a hint of regret. How much of my career had he missed by not paying attention, by accepting my mother's dismissive narrative without questioning it? "Thanks, Dad," I said. "It's been a long journey getting here." He was quiet for a moment, then spoke more carefully. "Your mother saw the announcement. She's processing it. I think she's overwhelmed, Jenny. This is bigger than she anticipated. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Even now, even with this achievement, the conversation had to center on my mother's feelings, her reaction, her experience. How is she processing it? I asked, not sure I wanted to know. She's proud, he said, though the word sounded tentative, but also hurt that she had to find out through a press release like everyone else. She feels excluded from something important in your life. And there it was, the reframing that made my achievement about her pain, that turned my professional triumph into a story of how I'd wounded her. Dad, I told her Monday, 2 days before the public announcement. That's more advance notice than almost anyone got. I followed proper protocols for confidential corporate appointments. I know, he said quickly. I'm just explaining how she's feeling. You know how she is about these things. I did know. My mother had spent my entire life finding ways to center herself in my stories, to make my choices about their impact on her rather than their meaning for me. I need to go, I said. I have interviews scheduled all day. Tell Mom I'll call her later. After hanging up, I sat with the familiar cocktail of emotions. Frustration that even this couldn't just be celebrated straightforwardly. Sadness that my father still prioritized managing my mother's reactions over expressing his own feelings. But also, surprisingly, a growing sense of detachment. For the first time, her response felt less crushing, more predictable. The weight of her disapproval, which had shaped so many of my decisions, suddenly felt lighter, less substantial. Emma appeared with toast and fruit, her expression knowing. Grandma? She asked. I nodded. Making it. About how I excluded her. Emma rolled her eyes. Of course she is. Because God forbid she just be happy for you. Her teenage directness made me laugh despite everything. Enough about Grandma, I said. Let's focus on today. First interview is at 9 with TechCrunch. The morning became a blur of video calls and conversations, each interviewer asking variations of the same questions. How did I get interested in AI ethics? What did I hope to accomplish on Microsoft's board? How did I navigate being a woman in tech leadership? I found my rhythm, articulating ideas I'd been developing for years, but never had such a prominent platform to share. The work itself hadn't changed, but the audience had expanded exponentially. Between interviews, I monitored social media and news coverage. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with industry leaders congratulating Microsoft on the appointment and colleagues from throughout my career sharing stories of working with me. But there were also the inevitable critics, people questioning my qualifications or suggesting the appointment was primarily about optics and diversity. I'd expected this, had been warned it would happen, but seeing it in writing still stung. Emma, monitoring her own feeds, came to show me a particularly nasty comment suggesting I'd been chosen to fill quotas rather than for actual expertise. Don't read this stuff, Mom, she said. These people don't know you or your work. They're just bitter. She was right, but the criticism triggered old insecurities, the voice that sounded suspiciously like my mother asking if I'd really earned this or just gotten lucky. Around noon, my phone rang with an unknown Seattle number. I answered to find Nicole, my sister-in-law, her voice bright and sharp. Jennifer, congratulations. This is absolutely amazing. Christopher and I were just saying we had no idea you were so accomplished. We really should get together soon and hear all about it. Her tone was performative, the kind of enthusiasm that felt calculated rather than genuine. Thank you, Nicole, I said carefully. It's been an intense morning. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I can only imagine. Your mother is beside herself, of course. She called me this morning practically in tears, feeling so left out. She said she had to learn about your appointment from the Seattle Times rather than from you. That must be so hard for her. My jaw clenched. Of course, my mother was spreading her version of events, positioning herself as the victim, enlisting sympathy from family members. I told Mom about the appointment on Monday, I said evenly. The announcement went public today. That's how corporate communications work. Nicole made a sympathetic sound that felt anything but. Of course. But you know how Barbara is. She has such high expectations for family closeness. This must feel like a betrayal to her. Betrayal. My professional achievement processed as an act of betrayal. The absurdity would have been funny if it weren't so painful. I need to go, I said. I have another interview starting. After we hung up, I felt the old patterns trying to reassert themselves, the guilt and obligation and need to manage everyone else's feelings. But something was different this time. The external validation from Microsoft, from media coverage, from industry leaders, created a counterweight to my family's complicated reactions. Emma brought me lunch, insisting I eat between calls. "You're doing great," she said. "I've been reading the interviews. You sound smart and confident and exactly like someone who should be on a corporate board." Her belief in me was uncomplicated and absolute, so different from my mother's conditional approval. "What would I do without you?" I asked. She grinned. "Probably forget to eat and stress yourself into a breakdown." The afternoon interviews were with more traditional media, Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal, their questions sharper and more probing. They asked about specific AI ethics issues, about Microsoft's challenges and controversies, about how I plan to navigate potential conflicts. These weren't congratulatory conversations but serious journalism, and I appreciated the respect implied in their rigor. They were treating me as someone whose opinions mattered, whose expertise was worth engaging deeply. Around for Christopher called. Unlike Nicole's performance or my mother's hurt, his voice carried something more genuine, more conflicted. "Jen, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and about what Mom said at Dad's retirement party. I didn't really hear it at the time, but you were right. It was dismissive and cruel. I'm sorry I didn't say something then." The apology surprised me, coming from someone who rarely acknowledged family dysfunction. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That means something." He sighed heavily. "Nicole's been talking to Mom all day. They're constructing this whole narrative about how you deliberately excluded the family, how you've always been secretive and distant. It's not fair, Jen. You followed the rules. You told people as soon as you could. But Mom's never going to see it that way." I felt something shift inside me, a lock clicking open. "Then maybe I need to stop trying to make her see it differently," I said. "Maybe I need to accept that her approval isn't something I can earn because the criteria keep changing to ensure I never measure up." Christopher was quiet for a long moment. "That's probably true," he finally admitted. "And I'm sorry you've had to deal with that. I know I've had it easier." We talked for a few more minutes, a more honest conversation than we'd had in years. He shared some of his own struggles with their expectations, the pressure of being the golden child, the exhaustion of maintaining the image. "Your board appointment is incredible, Jen," he said before we hung up. "Truly. Don't let Mom's reaction diminish that." After we ended the call, I felt surprisingly emotional. My brother and I had never been close, but his acknowledgement of the family dynamics, his willingness to name the unfairness, meant more than I'd expected. By evening, I was exhausted but exhilarated, having completed 6 major interviews and responded to hundreds of messages. Emma ordered dinner while I collapsed on the couch, my brain overloaded with information and attention. "How does it feel?" she asked, settling beside me with containers of Indian food. "Surreal," I admitted. This morning I was the same person I was yesterday, doing the same work. But now suddenly everyone's treating me differently, like I've transformed into someone more important. She considered this. "Maybe you didn't transform. Maybe the world just finally caught up to who you've always been." Her words hit something deep, a truth I'd been circling around for years. I hadn't changed. My expertise and accomplishments had existed before Microsoft's announcement. What changed was visibility, recognition, the external world finally seeing what I'd been building all along. Around 8, my mother finally called. I considered not answering, but something made me pick up. Her voice was controlled, tight with suppressed emotion. "Jennifer, I suppose congratulations are in order. This is certainly quite an achievement." The words were right, but delivered like an indictment. "Thank you, Mom," I said carefully. "It's been a significant day. I've been fielding calls all day from friends who saw the news," she continued. "Everyone asking me about your appointment, wanting details I couldn't provide because apparently I'm the last to know anything about your life." Her hurt was palpable, genuine even, but I felt less moved by it than I would have been days ago. "You weren't the last to know," I said. "I told you Monday before most people in my professional life knew. The announcement was confidential until today." "That's not the point," she snapped, her control slipping. The point is you didn't include me in the process. You didn't ask for my advice or perspective. You just made these major career decisions entirely on your own, like family input doesn't matter. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar trap. Any response would be wrong. If I explained that corporate board appointments don't involve family consultation, I'd be dismissive. If I apologized, I'd be validating her grievance and setting a precedent for future interference. Mom, I'm 44 years old, I said quietly. I make my own career decisions. That's not a rejection of family. That's just being an adult. She made a sound of frustration. You've always been like this, Jennifer. Independent to the point of isolation. Never letting anyone in, never valuing what your family might offer. And now you're being celebrated for it, interviewed like some kind of expert, while those of us who actually know you watch from the sidelines. Her words crystallized something I've been realizing gradually over the past few days. This wasn't about the board appointment or communication protocols. This was about control, about my mother's inability to accept that I'd built a life and career on terms she didn't dictate. My independence wasn't a flaw to be corrected but a choice to be respected, and she could never see it that way. I think we should talk when emotions aren't so high, I said. Today was overwhelming for everyone. Let's give it some space. She started to protest, but I gently ended the call, feeling both guilty and relieved. Emma looked at me with concern. You okay? I nodded slowly. I think I am actually. For the first time, I think I really am. We finished dinner and Emma disappeared to do homework while I sat with my laptop, reading through the day's coverage one final time. The articles were thoughtful and substantive, treating my appointment as significant not because of my family background or connections, but because of my actual expertise and contributions. The Seattle Times had run a profile tracing my career from early startups through current leadership roles, interviewing former colleagues who spoke about my integrity and vision. TechCrunch's piece focused on my published work on AI ethics, positioning me as someone who'd been thinking about these issues before they became mainstream concerns. This was the narrative I'd been building without fully realizing it, through years of quiet work and principled decisions. Not the story my mother would have written about prestigious titles and recognizable companies, but something more meaningful. A career built on substance rather than appearance, on impact rather than status. And now that story was visible, documented, validated by institutions that mattered in my field. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard Sterling. Watched your Bloomberg interview. You were brilliant, confident without being arrogant, substantive without being academic. This is just the beginning, Jen. You've arrived. I read his message several times, letting it sink in. You've arrived. Not you're arriving, not you're on your way, but you've arrived. Present tense. Accomplished fact. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights reflecting off Lake Washington in the distance. Somewhere across that water, my mother was probably still processing her hurt and anger, constructing elaborate explanations for why my success felt like her failure. My father was likely trying to mediate, uncomfortable as always with conflict. Christopher and Nicole were probably discussing implications and adjustments, recalibrating family dynamics to account for this shift. But their reactions, painful as they might be, couldn't diminish what had actually happened. I'd been appointed to Microsoft's board based on merit and expertise. I'd been interviewed by major media outlets and treated as an authority worth listening to. I'd received hundreds of messages from colleagues and peers congratulating me and acknowledging my contributions. The external world saw something my family had missed, and for the first time I trusted that external validation more than their internal assessment. Emma emerged from her room around 10, ready for bed. Big day tomorrow too? She asked. I shook my head. Tomorrow I get to breathe, process, figure out what comes next. She hugged me tightly. I'm so proud of you, Mom. Not just for the board thing but for how you handled today. You didn't let Grandma make it about her. You stayed focused on your achievement. After she went to bed, I sat in the quiet of the apartment, feeling the day settle into my bones. Exhaustion and exhilaration in equal measure, the sense of having crossed some invisible threshold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, ongoing family complications, the actual work of board membership. But tonight I let myself simply feel proud. Proud of the career I'd built against my family's understanding. Proud of the expertise I developed in areas they couldn't measure. Proud of choosing authenticity over approval, substance over status. My phone lit up with one final message, from a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Morgan, this is Rachel Park from TechCrunch again. Our feature piece on you is generating incredible engagement. Would you consider doing a follow-up podcast interview next week about women in tech leadership? We're getting requests from readers who want to hear more of your perspective. I smiled, typing back a confirmation. This was the beginning of something, not the culmination. The board appointment opened doors I hadn't fully anticipated, created platforms for conversations I'd been wanting to have for years. I thought about my mother's words at my father's retirement party, just days ago though it felt like months. You never accomplished anything. No real position, no recognition. Some people just plateau. She'd been so certain, so dismissive, measuring my worth by standards I'd rejected long ago. And yet, despite my rejection of those standards, her assessment had hurt. It had landed with the weight of accumulated disappointments, years of feeling unseen and undervalued. But tonight, with Microsoft's validation, with media recognition, with hundreds of messages from people who understood and appreciated my work, that hurt had transformed into something else. Not quite forgiveness, not quite indifference, but a kind of release. My mother's inability to see me clearly was her limitation, not my failure. I'd spent decades trying to translate my accomplishments into her language, to make my path visible through her particular lens. That translation had been impossible because we were speaking fundamentally different languages, valuing fundamentally different things. The rain started again, gentle against the windows, Seattle's constant companion. I thought about the retirement party, the champagne flutes catching light, the sound of my mother's voice cutting through celebration. That moment had felt like ending, like final proof that I'd never earn her approval. But maybe it had actually been a beginning, the catalyst that pushed me to stop seeking validation from someone constitutionally unable to provide it. Tomorrow I'd wake up as a Microsoft board member, with all the responsibility and opportunity that entailed. My family would continue processing in their complicated ways, and I'd navigate those dynamics as best I could. But something fundamental had shifted. I'd stopped waiting for permission to claim my achievements, stopped needing my mother's acknowledgement to believe in my own worth. The external validation helped certainly, but the real transformation was internal, a quiet decision to trust my own assessment of my life and work. I checked on Emma one final time, finding her sleeping peacefully, and stood watching her for a moment. This girl had grown up watching me build a career my family dismissed, seeing me choose principle over approval, authenticity over performance. Whatever complicated dynamics she'd have to navigate with her grandmother, at least she'd seen an alternative model, a different way of defining success and measuring worth. That felt like its own kind of accomplishment, separate from board appointments and media coverage, equally important in different ways. Before bed, I pulled up the Microsoft press release one final time, reading my official bio with fresh eyes. The Jennifer Morgan described there, with her expertise in leadership and contributions, that woman was real. She'd existed before the announcement, and would continue existing after the attention faded. My mother's inability to see her didn't make her less real, less accomplished, less valuable. It just made my mother's vision limited, her criteria inadequate for measuring lives lived outside her narrow definition of success. I fell asleep feeling something I hadn't felt in years, genuine peace with my choices, my path, my life as I'd actually lived it rather than as others thought I should. The validation from Microsoft was wonderful, the media attention gratifying, but the real gift was this internal shift, this finally letting go of the need for approval from someone who would never provide it. My mother had said I'd accomplished nothing, and in response the world had named me a thought leader, an expert, someone worth listening to. But more importantly, I'd finally started believing it myself, with or without her acknowledgement, with or without anyone's validation but my own. The days following the announcement blurred together in a cascade of activity that left little time for reflection. Interview requests continued flooding in, each outlet wanting their particular angle on the story. Fortune wanted to discuss women breaking barriers in tech governance. The Harvard Business Review requested an essay on ethical AI frameworks. NPR invited me for their morning show to discuss the responsibility of tech companies in shaping social policy. Each conversation pushed me to articulate ideas I'd been developing for years, giving shape and voice to concepts that had lived primarily in academic papers and internal company memos. Emma became my unofficial manager, tracking interview schedules and reminding me to eat between calls. She'd set up a corner of our living room as a makeshift studio, arranging lighting and background to look professional on video calls. "You need to take this seriously, Mom," she'd said when I protested the fuss. "You're representing something bigger than just yourself now. Women in tech are watching. People who felt dismissed by their families are watching. You have to show up well." Her words stayed with me through each interview, each public appearance. I wasn't just Jennifer Morgan anymore. Individual woman with a complicated family and a hard-won career. I'd become something symbolic, a representation of paths not traditionally valued, of expertise earned outside conventional routes. The weight of that felt both inspiring and suffocating, the pressure to be perfect, to say the right things, to represent well. By Friday, 3 days after the announcement, I was exhausted in ways that went beyond physical tiredness. The constant performance of confidence, of authority, of being the person everyone suddenly believed I was, had depleted something essential. I woke that morning with a headache throbbing behind my eyes and a text from my mother that simply read, "We need to talk. Today." No pleas, no request, just demand disguised as necessity. I made coffee and sat staring at the message, feeling the old anxiety rising. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to claim I was too busy with interviews and board preparation. But another part, the part still hoping for resolution or at least understanding, knew I couldn't avoid her forever. I texted back suggesting we meet for lunch at a neutral location. A quiet cafe in Fremont, far enough from both our homes to feel like neutral territory. Emma was at school, the apartment unnaturally quiet. I had one interview scheduled that morning with a podcast about leadership in emerging technology. Then the afternoon would be consumed by this confrontation I'd been both dreading and anticipating. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that felt like armor, professional and put together, the external appearance of someone who had their life under control even if internally everything felt precarious. The podcast interview went well, the host asking thoughtful questions about how I developed my ethical framework, what experiences had shaped my thinking about technology's social impact. I found myself telling stories I rarely shared, about early projects where I'd watched products launch without adequate consideration of consequences, about moments where profit motives overrode ethical concerns, about the slow, painful process of learning to trust my own judgment when it conflicted with market pressures. "You've clearly spent years thinking about these issues," the host observed. "Yet you weren't appointed to a major board position until now. Do you think that delay was about timing, or were there other factors?" The question hung in the air, inviting me to discuss bias, gender discrimination, the ways women's expertise gets overlooked or undervalued. I chose my words carefully, acknowledging systemic issues without claiming victimhood, recognizing that my path had been complicated by factors beyond merit, while not diminishing the achievement itself. After the interview ended, I had 2 hours before meeting my mother. I spent them reviewing documents Catherine Reynolds had sent about upcoming board meetings, trying to focus on substance and preparation rather than the anxiety building in my chest. The first official board meeting was scheduled for the following week at Microsoft's Redmond campus. I'd be walking into a room with people whose accomplishments were legendary, whose decisions shaped industries, and I'd be expected to contribute meaningfully to justify my presence there. The imposter syndrome that had been lurking at the edges of my consciousness pushed forward. What if I wasn't actually qualified? What if Microsoft had made a mistake, been swayed by optics rather than substance? What if my mother was right and I'd just gotten lucky, stumbled into something I hadn't truly earned? These thoughts spiraled, feeding on each other, until my phone buzzed with a text from Richard Sterling that somehow knew exactly what I needed to hear. "Stop doubting yourself. I've sat on 3 corporate boards and you're more prepared than I was for any of them. Trust your expertise. You earned this seat." His timing felt almost supernatural, his words cutting through the spiral of self-doubt. I texted back gratitude and forced myself to close the laptop, to stop preparing and just be for a moment. The anxiety about meeting my mother was real, but so was my exhaustion, and I needed to conserve energy for what was coming. The cafe in Fremont was small and deliberately unpretentious, the kind of place that served good coffee and homemade soup without trying to impress anyone. I arrived first, choosing a table in the back corner with good sight lines to the door, some instinct for strategic positioning asserting itself. My mother arrived exactly on time, wearing what I'd come to think of as her confrontation outfit, understated expensive clothes that communicated status without ostentation, her hair perfect, her makeup subtle. She sat down without greeting, her posture rigid, and I felt something in me go cold and clear. This wasn't going to be a conversation. This was going to be a performance of grievance, and my role was to apologize, to accommodate, to make her feelings my priority. But something had shifted in me over the past few days. The external validation, yes, but more importantly, the realization that I'd been playing a rigged game my entire life, trying to earn approval from someone who designed the rules to ensure I'd always fall short. "Thank you for meeting me," I said neutrally, offering nothing, claiming no responsibility for the tension between us. She ordered tea when the server appeared, her voice tight and controlled. I ordered the same, not because I wanted it but because engaging in the ritual of ordering felt like maintaining civility. Like we were two adults having a normal conversation rather than mother and daughter navigating decades of accumulated hurt. "I've had an awful week," she began once the server left. "Absolutely awful. Friends calling with congratulations about your appointment, asking questions I couldn't answer because apparently I'm not important enough to be included in your life anymore. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? To be your mother and know less about your career than strangers reading the newspaper?" Her voice carried across the quiet cafe, causing other patrons to glance our way. I kept my expression neutral, refusing to show the impact of her words even as they landed with familiar precision. "I told you about the appointment before the public announcement," I said quietly. "I followed proper protocols for confidential corporate news. This isn't about you being unimportant. This is about how these things actually work." She shook her head sharply. "Don't condescend to me, Jennifer. I understand corporate protocols. What I don't understand is why my own daughter couldn't find a way to include me meaningfully in one of the biggest moments of her career. Other families share these things. Other daughters value their mother's input and perspective. The comparison to other families, other daughters, was a weapon she wielded my entire life. The implicit message that I was deficient, that my way of being was wrong compared to some idealized version of filial devotion. What would meaningful inclusion have looked like? I asked, genuinely curious. The opportunity was confidential. I couldn't discuss it broadly until it was finalized. When it became something I could share, I told you immediately. What else should I have done? She leaned forward, her eyes bright with emotion I couldn't quite identify. Hurt, certainly, but also something that looked like anger, maybe even jealousy. "You could have wanted my involvement," she said. "You could have sought my advice about whether to accept, about how to negotiate, about what this means for your life. Instead, you made all these decisions entirely on your own, like family input is worthless. Like I'm worthless." The conversation had arrived at its true center, the place where my independence got interpreted as rejection, where my autonomy became evidence of her inadequacy. Our tea arrived and I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, using the heat to ground myself in physical sensation rather than emotional reaction. "Mom, I'm 44 years old. I've been making my own career decisions for over 20 years. That's not a rejection of you. That's just being an adult. And honestly, given how you've characterized my career over the years, I'm not sure why you'd expect me to seek your advice about professional opportunities." Her face flushed. "What is that supposed to mean?" I took a breath, knowing I was about to say things that couldn't be unsaid, that would shift our relationship permanently. But the alternative was continuing this dance of hurt and resentment, and I was finally too tired to keep performing. "It means at Dad's retirement party, you told Christopher I'd accomplished nothing, that I had no real position or recognition, that some people just plateau. You said that hours before Microsoft called to finalize my board appointment." She opened her mouth to protest, but I continued, needing to finish the thought. "And that wasn't an isolated comment, Mom. That's been your assessment of my career for years. The startups I worked for weren't prestigious enough. The leadership roles I took weren't at companies you'd heard of. The work I did in AI ethics wasn't as impressive as Christopher's finance career. You've spent decades making clear that my path disappoints you, that I've failed to live up to some standard I never agreed to meet. So forgive me if I didn't rush to seek your input on whether to join Microsoft's board." The silence that followed felt enormous, filling the space between us with everything we'd never said directly. All the subtext finally made text. My mother's face had gone pale, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her teacup. "I have never been disappointed in you," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. "I've only wanted you to reach your full potential, to have the security and recognition you deserve." "On your terms," I said. "You've wanted me to have those things on your terms, measured by your metrics. And when I chose a different path, when I valued different things, you interpreted that as failure. But Mom, I've been successful. I've built products used by millions of people. I've led teams that did innovative, meaningful work. I've published research that's shaped how the industry thinks about ethical AI. All of that existed before Microsoft's announcement. The only thing that changed is now other people see it, people who understand the field I work in." She shook her head, her composure cracking. "You're twisting everything. I've been supportive. I've been there for every birthday, every holiday. I've helped with Emma when you needed it. Just because I've had concerns about your career choices doesn't mean I haven't been a good mother." The conversation was sliding sideways, moving from specific grievances to global assessments, and I felt exhausted by the familiar pattern. "I'm not saying you haven't been there in certain ways," I said carefully. "But support isn't just showing up physically. It's also seeing people for who they are, valuing their choices even when those choices don't match what you would have chosen. And Mom, you've never really seen me. You've seen who you wanted me to be, and you've been disappointed that I'm not that person." Tears were forming in her eyes now, whether from hurt or anger I couldn't tell. "That's a terrible thing to say. I see you perfectly clearly, Jennifer. Perhaps more clearly than you see yourself." "Then what do you see?" I asked, the question coming out more as challenge than genuine inquiry. She was quiet for a long moment, her tea growing cold between her hands. "I see someone brilliant who's always taken the hardest possible path. Someone who rejects help and guidance, who insists on doing everything alone, who pushes away the people who love her. I see my daughter making her life unnecessarily difficult by refusing to play by the rules that would make things easier." Her answer revealed everything, the fundamental misunderstanding between us. She saw my independence as stubbornness, my authenticity as rebellion, my different path as rejection rather than self-determination. And no amount of external validation would change that perception because it wasn't really about my achievements. It was about her need for control, her inability to accept that her children might choose differently than she would choose for them. "I need to be honest with you," I said slowly. "I don't think we're going to resolve this. I think we want fundamentally different things from our relationship. You want a daughter who seeks your approval and follows your guidance. I want a mother who sees me for who I actually am and values that person. Those might be incompatible wants." She drew back as if I'd struck her. "So what, you're cutting me out of your life? Because I'm not perfect enough? Because I've made mistakes as a mother?" "I'm not cutting you out," I clarified. "But I am setting boundaries. I'm not going to keep apologizing for my career choices, or for making decisions without consulting you. I'm not going to manage your feelings about my achievements. I'm 44 years old, Mom. I've earned the right to live my life on my own terms, and if that makes you uncomfortable or hurt, that's something you need to work through, not something I need to fix." The tears that had been threatening spilled over, and part of me felt terrible, felt like I'd been cruel, like I should comfort her and take back what I'd said. But another part, stronger now than it had been even days ago, held firm. This was necessary. This honesty, however painful, was better than continuing the pretense that accommodation and silence would eventually earn me the approval I sought. "I should go," she said, standing abruptly and gathering her purse. "I don't know what's happened to you, Jennifer, but this coldness, this rejection of family, I hope you realize what you're throwing away." She left without waiting for a response, her exit dramatic and final. I sat alone at the table, my tea untouched, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over me like a heavy blanket. Other patrons were studiously not looking at me, pretending they hadn't witnessed the confrontation. I paid for both teas we hadn't drunk and left, stepping out into afternoon sunshine that felt incongruous with my emotional state. My phone was buzzing with messages, but I ignored them, walking instead along the canal, watching ducks paddle through water that reflected clouds and sky in perfect mirrored symmetry. Had I been too harsh? Too blunt? Could I have handled that conversation with more grace, More compassion for her pain? The questions circled, but the answers felt surprisingly clear. Maybe I could have been gentler, but gentleness had never worked before. Accommodation and silence had only perpetuated the dynamic, allowed her to maintain her narrative without confronting the damage it caused. Sometimes honesty had to be sharp to cut through years of accumulated avoidance. I called Emma during her lunch break, needing to hear her voice. "How did it go with Grandma?" she asked immediately. I gave her the abbreviated version, the confrontation, my mother's tears and dramatic exit, my own exhaustion with the entire dynamic. Emma was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised me. "I'm glad you told her the truth, Mom. I know it's hard, but she needed to hear it. And maybe you needed to say it more than she needed to hear it." Her wisdom at 16 continued to astound me. "When did you get so smart?" I asked. She laughed. "I learned from watching you. From watching you build a career everyone dismissed, from watching you stick to your values even when it cost you, from watching you finally stand up for yourself. That's what real strength looks like, Mom. Not perfect performance, but honest integrity." We talked for a few more minutes before she had to return to class, and I felt steadier, more grounded in the reality of what I'd done and why it mattered. The weekend passed in a strange limbo. No word from my mother, which wasn't surprising. My father called Saturday evening, his voice tired. "Your mother told me about your lunch. She's quite upset, Jenny. Is there any way you could reach out, maybe apologize for how things were said?" The request was so predictable it was almost funny, this lifelong pattern of me being asked to manage my mother's emotions, to smooth over conflicts I hadn't created. "Dad, I'm not apologizing for telling the truth," I said. "Mom asked what she sees when she looks at me, and I explained how her perception has affected me. That's not something requiring apology." He sighed heavily. "But you're her daughter. Can't you just make peace? Life is too short for this kind of conflict." The ease with which he dismissed my legitimate grievances, reducing them to mere conflict that I should rise above, crystallized something. "Actually, Dad, life is too short to keep pretending everything is fine when it isn't. I love Mom, but I can't keep sacrificing my own well-being to maintain her comfort. If she wants to repair our relationship, she knows where to find me. But I'm not chasing her approval anymore." We ended the call shortly after, the disappointment in his voice palpable but less devastating than it might have been weeks ago. Monday morning arrived with the first board meeting looming. I dressed in a navy suit, professional and confident, and drove to Microsoft's Redmond campus with my heart racing. The security guard checked my ID, now updated to reflect my board member status, and directed me to the executive building. The architecture was modern glass and steel, everything gleaming and purposeful, the physical embodiment of technological ambition. Catherine Reynolds met me in the lobby, her smile warm and professional. "Ready for your first meeting?" she asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She walked me through the building, pointing out various departments and amenities, making small talk designed to ease my nerves. We arrived at the boardroom 15 minutes early, giving me time to review materials and settle into the space. The room was exactly what I'd imagined: long table, expensive chairs, walls of screens for presentations and remote participants. Other board members began arriving, each introduction a small moment of surreality. These were people I'd read about, whose decisions I'd studied, whose careers represented the pinnacle of tech industry achievement. And I was joining them as a peer, as someone whose expertise was valued at the same level. The meeting itself was intense and fascinating, diving deep into strategic questions about AI development, market positioning, ethical considerations in product deployment. I found myself contributing more than I'd anticipated, my years of thinking about these issues translating into practical insights. Other board members asked follow-up questions, engaged with my perspectives, treated my input as valuable rather than decorative. During a break, an older board member named Thomas Williamson approached me. He'd been at Microsoft for over a decade, was respected for his technical expertise and strategic thinking. "Your comments about AI bias mitigation were excellent," he said. "Exactly the kind of perspective we need more of. I'm glad you're here." The validation from someone with his stature felt significant, confirming that I belonged in this space not because of diversity initiatives or optics but because of substance. The meeting lasted 4 hours, my brain exhausted but exhilarated by the end. Catherine checked in as people dispersed, asking how I felt it had gone. Overwhelming but good, I admitted. Everyone was welcoming. I felt heard. She smiled. That's because you had valuable things to say. This is just the beginning, Jennifer. You're going to make real impact here. Driving home that afternoon, I felt the cognitive dissonance of living multiple realities simultaneously. In one reality, I was a newly minted board member at one of the world's most powerful companies, contributing to decisions affecting billions of users. In another, I was a daughter navigating the fallout of finally standing up to her mother, uncertain whether the relationship could be repaired or even if repair was desirable. Both realities were true, both demanded attention and energy, and balancing them felt like an impossible task. Emma was home when I arrived, cooking dinner with the competence of someone who'd been taking care of herself more than she should have had to. "How was the board meeting?" she asked, and I spent the next hour telling her everything, describing the room and people, the topics discussed, the moment when I realized I actually did belong there. She listened with pride evident in her expression, asking smart questions, engaging like the intelligent young woman she was becoming. "Has Grandma called?" she asked eventually, the question careful. I shook my head. "Not yet. I don't know if she will." Emma considered this. "Would you want her to?" The question cut to the heart of something I'd been avoiding examining too closely. Would I want her to call? What would I want her to say? Was reconciliation possible if it required me to go back to accommodating her need to criticize and control? "I'd want her to call if she was ready to actually hear me," I said slowly. "To acknowledge how her words have hurt, to recognize that my path has value even if it's not the path she would have chosen. But I don't think she's capable of that, Emma. I think her worldview is too rigid, too invested in being right." Emma nodded, her expression sad but understanding. "Then maybe it's better if she doesn't call." "Not yet anyway." The week continued with more media attention gradually tapering, more interview requests that I started being selective about, more messages from people throughout my career expressing congratulations, and sometimes surprise at the scope of my achievements. It was interesting watching people recalibrate their perception of me, seeing colleagues suddenly treat my opinions with more weight, seeing former managers reach out as if we'd been close when in reality they barely noticed me at the time. Richard Sterling called midweek to check in, wanting to hear about the board meeting and how I was adjusting. "The first few meetings are always the most intense," he said. "You're trying to prove yourself, establish credibility, figure out the dynamics. But it gets easier. You start to trust your place there." We talked about strategy, about how to make meaningful impact versus just filling a seat, about the long game of board membership and what I hope to accomplish. "How's the family situation?" he asked eventually. I'd been avoiding the topic, but his directness required honesty. "Complicated. My mother and I had a pretty brutal confrontation. We haven't spoken since." He was quiet for a moment. "That must be hard. Especially now when you might want to celebrate with family." His empathy landed softly, acknowledging the pain without trying to fix it. "Part of me wants her to be proud," I admitted. "But I'm realizing that getting her to see me clearly might be impossible. And I'm tired of trying." Richard made a thoughtful sound. "You know, Jen, sometimes the people who should be proudest are the least capable of showing it. Their inability to celebrate your success says everything about their limitations and nothing about your worth." His words echoed what I'd been learning, this painful truth that my mother's approval had never been about my achievements but about her need for control. By Friday, 2 weeks after the initial announcement, life had settled into a new rhythm. The media attention had largely moved on to other stories. My calendar was filling with board-related meetings and commitments. Emma was applying to colleges, her essays touching on themes of resilience and independent thinking that I recognized as products of our shared experience. And my mother's silence continued, a presence in its absence, a relationship in suspended animation. I was preparing dinner when my phone rang with Christopher's name. We'd spoken briefly since the announcement but hadn't had a real conversation. "Jen," he said when I answered, his voice uncertain. "I wanted to check in, see how you're doing with everything." I appreciated the gesture even as I felt wary of where it might lead. "Doing okay," I said carefully. "Adjusting to board responsibilities, settling into the new normal. "Mom's still pretty upset," he said, and I felt my shoulders tense. Here it came, the request to apologize, to make peace, to be the bigger person. But Christopher surprised me. "And I think she should be upset, honestly. Not about you, but about herself. I've been thinking a lot about what you said at Dad's retirement party, about how she dismissed your career. I heard it then but didn't really hear it, you know? Didn't understand how often that's been happening." His acknowledgement caught me off guard. "What changed?" I asked. He laughed, a sound without humor. "Nicole, actually. She's been talking about your board appointment nonstop, how impressive it is, how connected you must be. And I realize she's doing exactly what Mom does, measuring success by external markers without understanding the actual work. It made me see the pattern differently." We talked for nearly an hour, my brother opening up about his own struggles with their expectations, his fear of failing, his exhaustion at maintaining the image of the successful son. "You got out," he said at one point. "You built a life on your own terms, and I admire that, even though it's probably made things harder." His honesty created an unexpected bridge between us, a possibility of adult-sibling relationship based on authenticity rather than performance. "Has Mom said anything about wanting to talk?" I asked eventually. Christopher sighed. "She's waiting for you to apologize. She's convinced you were cruel and disrespectful, that you owe her amends." The answer wasn't surprising but still disappointed me. "I'm not apologizing for telling the truth," I said. "If she wants to rebuild our relationship, it has to start with her acknowledging how her words have affected me. I can't keep being the one who accommodates and sacrifices." "I don't think she's capable of that kind of acknowledgement," Christopher said quietly. "I think her identity is too wrapped up in being right, in being the good mother who only wanted the best for her children. Admitting she's hurt you would require her to see herself differently, and I don't know if she can do that." His assessment matched my own. This sad recognition that reconciliation might require change my mother couldn't or wouldn't undertake. That weekend, Emma and I drove to the Oregon coast, needing space and perspective away from the city. We walked long stretches of beach, the Pacific Ocean stretching endless and gray, waves crashing with rhythmic certainty. "Do you regret standing up to Grandma?" Emma asked at one point, her voice barely audible over the wind. I thought about it carefully, wanting to give her an honest answer. "I regret the pain it's caused," I said. "I wish she could hear what I was saying without feeling attacked. But no, I don't regret telling her the truth. I spent too many years trying to earn approval that was never going to come. Setting boundaries, claiming my right to live on my own terms, that was necessary. It's just sad that it came at the cost of our relationship." Emma slipped her hand into mine, her grip warm and steady. "Maybe the relationship you had wasn't worth preserving. Maybe you need to build something new." Her words stayed with me as we drove home Sunday evening, the sky turning purple and gold over the mountains. Maybe the old relationship, built on my accommodation and her control, wasn't worth preserving. Maybe something new could emerge, if both of us were willing to do the difficult work of seeing each other clearly. But that would require her participation, her willingness to change, and I was no longer willing to do all the emotional labor of maintaining connection. Monday brought another board meeting. This one focused on ethical implications of a new AI product launch. I found myself in passionate disagreement with another board member about data privacy considerations, articulating concerns I've been developing for years about user consent and algorithmic transparency. The discussion was intense but respectful, other members engaging seriously with the issues I raised. By the meeting's end, the product launch had been delayed for additional ethical review, a decision I directly influenced. Catherine Reynolds pulled me aside afterward. "That was excellent work today. You're already making the kind of impact we hoped you would." Her validation felt good but also strange, this growing comfort with being seen as an authority, with having my opinions shape major corporate decisions. The Jennifer Morgan who'd stood at her father's retirement party 2 weeks ago, absorbing her mother's dismissal, felt like a different person than the one walking out of this boardroom. That evening my father called. His voice was careful, measured. "Ginny, I wanted to let you know your mother is seeing a therapist. She's been really struggling with everything that happened, and she agreed to talk to someone." The information surprised me, my mother being deeply skeptical of therapy, viewing it as something for people who couldn't manage their own problems. That's good, I said. I hope it helps her. She's realizing some things, he continued carefully, about her expectations, about how she's communicated with you over the years. It's painful for her, but I think it's necessary. I felt a flicker of something, not quite hope but possibility. I'm glad she's doing that work, Dad. I really am. But I need you to know I'm not waiting for her to finish therapy before I live my life. I've set boundaries that I need to maintain regardless of whether she ever acknowledges the harm she's caused. He was quiet for a long moment. I understand. And Jenny, I want to apologize for my part in this. For not seeing how she was treating you, for asking you to accommodate rather than addressing the actual problem. I should have done better. His apology, unexpected and genuine, brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. We talked for a few more minutes, the conversation more honest than any we'd had in years, before saying goodbye. I told Emma about the call, about our grandmother starting therapy, about our grandfather's apology. Do you think she'll change? Emma asked. I shook my head slowly. I don't know. Real change is hard, especially for someone in their 60s with deeply ingrained patterns. But at least she's trying, which is more than I expected. Emma looked thoughtful. And if she doesn't change? If she can't acknowledge what you need her to acknowledge? I pulled her close. Then I'll be sad, but I'll be okay. I have a life I'm proud of, work that matters, and you. That's enough. The weeks continued rolling forward, board meetings and media opportunities, speaking engagements and networking events. I was invited to keynote a conference on women in tech leadership, asked to join an advisory board for a startup focused on AI ethics, approached about writing a book on responsible innovation. My calendar filled with the activities of someone whose expertise was recognized and valued, whose voice mattered in important conversations. 3 months after the initial announcement, just before Thanksgiving, my mother finally called. Her voice was tentative, lacking the certainty that usually characterized her communication. Jennifer, I was wondering if we could talk. In person if you're willing. I agreed to meet, curious but guarded, at the same Fremont cafe where we'd had our confrontation. She looked different somehow, smaller maybe, or just less armored. We ordered tea, the ritual providing structure for the awkward beginning. I've been working with a therapist, she said without preamble, trying to understand why your words affected me so deeply. Why I felt so attacked when you were just being honest. I nodded, saying nothing, letting her continue. She's helped me see some patterns I wasn't aware of. How I've used criticism as a form of control, how I've measured love by conformity rather than acceptance. How my expectations for you were really about my own insecurities and need for external validation. The self-awareness in her words was startling, so different from her usual defensive certainty. I'm not here to ask you to forgive me, she continued. I know I've hurt you deeply over many years, and I can't undo that. But I want you to know I'm trying to do better, to be better. And I'm genuinely proud of you, Jennifer. Not just the Microsoft board, though that's impressive, but the way you've built a career based on your values, the way you've raised Emma, the integrity you've maintained even when it cost you. I see that now, and I'm sorry it took me so long. Tears were streaming down her face, genuine emotion rather than manipulation. I felt my own eyes welling up. This moment I'd wanted for so long finally arriving, but feeling different than I'd imagined. Thank you for saying that, Mom, I said quietly. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge these things. We talked for 2 hours, a real conversation rather than performance or confrontation. She asked about board meetings and I shared some of what I was working on. She told me about therapy, the painful realization she was processing. We didn't resolve everything. Decades of hurt couldn't be healed in one conversation. But we started something new. A relationship based on honesty rather than pretense. Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house was different that year. Smaller, just immediate family, but more genuine. My mother bit her tongue several times. I could see her catching herself before making critical comments, choosing different words. It wasn't perfect, change was slow and effortful, but it was real. Christopher pulled me aside at one point. I don't know what happened between you two, but Mom's different. Better. I squeezed his arm. She's trying. That's all any of us can do. Emma gave a toast before dinner. Her words simple and profound. I'm grateful for family that's learning to be honest with each other, even when honesty is hard. And I'm especially grateful for my mom, who taught me that success means living according to your own values, not someone else's expectations. I met my mother's eyes across the table and saw them shining with tears, with recognition maybe, with the beginning of understanding. The year ended with more professional opportunities, more recognition, more evidence that the path I'd chosen had led somewhere meaningful. But the real triumph wasn't the board position or media coverage or industry respect. It was sitting at Thanksgiving dinner with a family that was finally learning to see each other clearly, to value authenticity over performance. It was Emma applying to colleges with essays about resilience and integrity. It was my mother slowly, painfully, learning to offer the acceptance I'd always needed. On New Year's Eve, I stood on my balcony watching fireworks over Seattle, reflecting on the year that had transformed everything. My mother had been wrong at that retirement party. I hadn't accomplished nothing. I hadn't plateaued. I'd built a career of substance and meaning, raised a remarkable daughter, and finally claimed my right to live on my own terms. And perhaps most importantly, I'd stopped seeking approval from people who measured success by standards I'd never agreed to meet. Emma joined me on the balcony as midnight approached, both of us wrapped in blankets against the cold. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. I considered the question, searching for the truth. "I'm thinking about how being dismissed by my mother led to Microsoft calling. How sometimes the worst moments contain the seeds of transformation. How standing up for yourself can cost you relationships but give you something more valuable, self-respect." The fireworks exploded in brilliant color, reflecting off Puget Sound, and Emma leaned against me. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said quietly. "Not just for the big achievements but for the small brave choices that led to them. For teaching me that living authentically matters more than living comfortably." I kissed the top of her head, feeling more grateful than words could express. "I learned that from you too, baby. We've taught each other." As the new year began, I felt ready for whatever came next. More board meetings and professional challenges certainly. Continued complicated navigation of family relationships inevitably. But also possibility, the chance to use my platform for meaningful impact, to mentor women facing similar struggles, to contribute to conversations about technology's role in society. My mother had tried to diminish me at that retirement party, had declared me unremarkable and unsuccessful. Instead, her words had catalyzed something powerful, a final breaking point that forced me to choose between her approval and my own integrity. I'd chosen integrity, and it had led me here, to a balcony overlooking a city that sparkled with possibility, with a daughter who understood that success means defining it for yourself, with a career that finally reflected my expertise and values. The Microsoft board position was wonderful, but the real achievement was this: standing in my own truth, claiming my accomplishments without apology, building relationships based on authenticity rather than accommodation. The fireworks faded and Emma went inside to warm up. I stayed a moment longer, the cold air sharp and clarifying. Tomorrow I'd wake as someone recognized, valued, seen clearly for who I'd always been. My mother's opinion had mattered less and less as the external validation grew, but more importantly, my own opinion of myself had solidified, grown unshakable. I'd finally learned the lesson that had eluded me for decades. The only approval that truly mattered was my own, and once I claimed that, everything else followed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.